Welcome everybody, my name is Anthony James, founder and CEO of LinuxAcademy.com, and today I'm joined by several Linux Academy and Serverless Academy course authors. First, let me introduce you to Brandon McWilliams, Linux Academy course author, who just recently got some WD-40 for his chair. But you know, what course did you...
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
what course did you just release this week, Brandon?
So the Certified Jenkins Engineer course just shipped. Let's go.
That was the Puppet 2016 certification course.
Who is Serverless Academy, Linux Academy as well, course author, as well as founder of DevOps Live Conference. And introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, Johnny.
Yeah, sure. So as Anthony mentioned, I am a course author for Serverless Academy and also Linux Academy. And I recently spoke at a conference called Developer Week and got to give some amazing serverless content there. And I put out a course late last year called Serverless Concepts, and it's already been viewed by more than 4,000 people. So it's getting some pretty good traction.
Very awesome, very awesome. And then we kind of breezed over Brandon and Travis here. And why don't you guys just give us a quick background of maybe how you ended up at Linux Academy and what's next on your plate?
Yeah, so so I started in a traditional IT environment, moved into more of a cloud DevOps role, working with some OpenStack and Puppet and Jenkins, a lot of the common DevOps stack type components. And got a call from a recruiter about this awesome position and went after it. So it's been great. Yeah, so I did the Certified Jenkins Engineer course, and it's covering all of the major points in the 2017 Certified Jenkins Engineer Cloud Beast provided test. And I'm also thrown in some live labs and exercises to help those points that are asked for in the certification course or certification test.
We're really waiting on that. And
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, you kind of cut out there. I missed what you said. Okay. Well, I've spent, I think, probably over 15 years as a developer. I did a lot with automation and provisioning, and that's when I started moving more into more of a traditional DevOps role. I spent time as a Puppet professional services engineer through not Puppet themselves, but I did work with them. Let's see, what else did I do? Worked a lot with Amazon, AWS, did some AMI configurations using Puppet. How I found out about Linux Academy was through a former coworker. As far as my recent course, again, I said it's the Puppet 2016 certification course. We cover a lot of stuff there. We talk about installing, various ways to install the Puppet Master. There's also how to deploy your code using Code Manager, stuff like that.
Awesome. Very exciting for that. So for those watching, you're probably picking up on a theme that we have for today's episode with our Q&A for instructors, and that is DevOps. And so, you know, since we have all of these DevOps courses we just launched and the DevOps Live conference that Johnny has founded and does a lot of DevOps teaching at, it sounded like a great opportunity to address some of the common questions we get in the community. So we opened up a live Twitter and Facebook right now. If you have a question live, you can feel free to send those in. We have somebody watching it. And so we're just going to start off with the very basic here. And so, you know, one of the best questions, and really what seems like an easy question, but might be challenging, that we get often is, what is DevOps? And is it, or how is it different than system administration?
Yeah. So I think I could probably start there. And I think that that's one of the common misconceptions. Some people think that DevOps is just a traditional sysadmin with some more development experience. But really, one of the things that I heard not too long ago is that DevOps is somewhat like Agile matured. It's really more of a movement. And one of the DevOps thought leaders named John Willis, he came up with an acronym for the cycle of maturity in your organization. It's called the CAM cycle. And so this is really important inside of DevOps circles. And so CAM stands for culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. And so this is how your organization can mature. And so an organization first evaluates their own culture, some of their own processes, and they normally are trying to figure out an answer to the question, how can we become a high-performing organization? Or how can we improve or get features out to production faster than we were doing before? And so that evaluation of culture moves into evaluating automation tools, which then moves into measuring how did those automation tools or processes impact what we were doing before. And then from measurement, it goes into sharing. Then we have to communicate to the business. How are things maturing? And then that impacts culture, and the cycle repeats. So DevOps is really a movement on becoming a high-performing organization.
You know, that's a great explanation. It's going to be hard to follow that one up. Brandon or Travis, do you have anything to add, or are we just going to let Johnny win that one?
No, I do have something to add. I get that question quite a bit too, and you covered basically all of it. One thing that a lot of people ask, the very basics of DevOps, what it is, it's the intersection of development, system administration, and QA. Because traditionally, a lot of that was you would throw stuff over the fence. You'd write code, you'd throw it over the fence to QA, and then it would get thrown over the fence to operations for deployment. So it's more of people, like you said, culture-wise, working together, closer together, to basically get stuff out to production quicker. So a lot of it is like it's building pipelines to release your code.
Travis, do you have anything to add?
That was me.
That was
Travis, yeah.
It's okay.
No, I mean, I think Johnny and Travis really covered it. I would on the whole siloed sysadmin, dev, QA paradigm that's always existed. DevOps attempts to just shatter that and bring everyone together, like you guys have basically said. So yeah, I mean that's what I think about when I think of DevOps.
Yeah, and speaking as a developer, I've encountered a lot of that too, specifically the silo issues.
Yeah.
Everyone in there. What might be some of the hurdles that an organization faces that has not really implemented DevOps principles and is starting to do that? You know, what kind of hurdles would you suggest or caution them to look out after?
I'll let one of you guys take this one first.
Oh man. Okay. Speaking from experience. Speaking from experience, there's coming from like a lot of organizations, they do waterfall, and they view agile as being mini waterfall, and that's not what it is. So my last company I worked for, that's kind of what they were doing, and it was just atrocious. It's very painful. So if it's this kind of halfway implementation of agile, but at the same time kind of keeping some of the things from waterfall, and if it's all or nothing, you have to do all agile, all DevOps. You can't kind of do partial aspects of it. If you do that, it's gonna fail miserably. Like you said, it's a cultural movement within an organization.
That was great. Brandon, do you have anything on that?
Travis is right. It's cultural, and it often boils down to people's willingness to accept doing things a new way. I mean, that's to me, like that's the first step in implementing DevOps is getting the stakeholders on board, getting the people that have been doing it a different way for years, and they oftentimes have valuable skill sets, valuable knowledge, but making them think differently and showing them the merits of it. I mean, that's the biggest challenge, I think, and that's where you get the big gains.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen organizations where this whole DevOps movement has tried to be from the bottom up, tried to been a grassroots movement, and ultimately it's been snuffed out. You know, it has to come at some point from top down. The major top level management has to understand why some of these initiatives are important. They need to get on board, and sometimes it's hard to convince them because change is hard. And people don't like the kind of pain that's associated with change. You know, some people say, well, if something hurts, just don't do it anymore or do less of it. Well, DevOps is kind of saying if it hurts, it's significant and we need to do it more so that way we can stop it from hurting.
You know, I'd like to add a few things more from a, kind of a leadership and management standpoint. As a 50-person company and growing, we've changed a lot, right? And there's been growing pains. And so, from a management perspective, if there's CIOs or, leaders in the IT world out there that are looking at implementing this, when change occurs, it's not, people aren't necessarily open to change. They can become fearful, right? And the reason they might become fearful is because we're not communicating really what we're trying to accomplish, right? And so what's going to happen is it's going to require constant communication. It's going to require constant training, and the transition will occur. And when everybody on the behind it, why they're important, and they have the training to make that happen, the change becomes a lot more natural. So as leaders, we need to make sure that we really focus on communicating that change, reassuring, and communicating why it's important to implement those agile practices and really bring the team in as part of that process. Include them into the process of deciding and planning how to implement that to really get everybody on board. So, that was a great conversation there. So thanks, guys, for that. So one of our other questions, and we have a list of them here, so I'll just say other questions as we continue going. It looks like we have one that came in from Twitter. Should we just go ahead and we'll come back to it. And so how do I get started with DevOps? What Linux Academy courses should I take? A little bit of Linux experience, and they're just curious, what do I do?
So I could probably start. And so I would say that just like I mentioned the CAM cycle before, answering this question is going to be important for you to evaluate where your organization is. It's going to help you answer what kind of courses you should start to take. Because some organizations, they have to do significant culture change before they're ready for some of the more mature automation tooling or measurement tooling. And so some places are, a .NET shop or Windows shop. Others are Linux, Mac, others are a mixed environment. And so some of the tools, you need to choose them based on that kind of context. And but we at Linux Academy offer courses on a lot of the automation tools, regardless of the kind of environment that you're trying to support. So first I would say, assess your environment, assess your culture, and then that might help you make the decision.
Anything to add, Brandon or Travis?
Yeah, a little bit. I think if you're new and you're starting out and you're not currently working for an organization, I think it's a good start is getting involved in learning Linux. I have a very different background. I started off as a Windows NT administrator and eventually transitioned over into more Linux-based things. So I think one of the core things is to understand the operating system and then look at moving into configuration management.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also learning some dev type things like Git management along with that. And then once you move through configuration management, maybe just focus on one first, whether it's Chef, Puppet, or Ansible, get a good understanding of what it's doing and how it works. And then you can work in some CI/CD stuff with Jenkins or other platforms and get into the full pipeline view of things.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about tools that are applied for DevOps principles, but DevOps principles is a kind of a management thing as well. It's a culture, it's an organizational standpoint, as well as tools to help support that. But there are tools that are used to help support those processes. Whether it's from an agile perspective, if you're using Jira or Pivotal Tracker, there's tools from a management perspective as well as an implementation of the technology perspective for DevOps. And so that actually transitions us very well to, it's specific towards a configuration management tool. How do I choose between Ansible, Puppet, and Chef, followed up by should I use only one or can I?
And you can grab contributions from the community that way. And also it's very declarative. So you're not necessarily having to specify exactly how to do what you want to do, but you say what do you want the end state of configuration to look like. And so I'll let, like Travis just finished the Puppet course, why don't you share, a little more of those differences?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sorry if there's a barking dog in the background. As far as Puppet's concerned, I picked it up pretty easily, mainly because of the Puppet DSL. I didn't have a lot of Ruby experience at the time, so with the DSL, I think that's a lot easier to learn than maybe like Chef, which is purely Ruby based, or Ansible, which is more Python based. So I think a lot of it kind of depends on your background. The thing I really like about Puppet, specifically with the newer versions, is they added in application orchestration, which I don't know if Ansible or Chef has something very similar, but it gives you the ability to go and set up the configuration order, not just of your Puppet code, but of a stack. And what I mean by stack, like a load balancer, HA proxy server, a Apache server, and a database server. So you basically can build this order of how things get provisioned out and built out. Where before that came out, you had to stand one up individually for everything to work right. So there's that. Puppet has been pretty good about adding new features over, I would say, like the last 3 years. So I'm actually been pretty impressed by it.
I'm going to jump in there, and what I love about this conversation is you can get extremely passionate about it. At times, this can turn into like an iOS versus an Android conversation, right? Much like you had multiple years ago. But my most recent course on Linux Academy being Chef Fluency Badge, and also have done Puppet. I was the first Puppet course, as well as we run Chef as part of our infrastructure here. We run Terraform and Ansible as well. Really
right.
What I like about Chef is it could be imperative or declarative, right? You can define something but not have to determine how it's implemented, or you can easily extend it and define how you want it to be implemented. And what I like about that is the Ruby language itself, right? So your extending of the language versus using the regular DSL is relatively close to the same.
Right.
You do have a Chef DSL, but it's with Ruby type syntax. So, there's some uniformity across there. Chef just launched its automate function, which really allows to build real easy and simple pipelines for testing. It takes a lot of those, maybe some processes, and saying there's 6 steps to this. Here's how we implement it and make it super easy for lint tests and Chef tests. Good for that. Ansible is when you have persistent state machines more than anything, right? If you need to have
right.
good security compliance and compliance testing, and then pipelines around deploying not only your infrastructure code, but your application code. Ansible, and this is all proprietary opinionated, right? This is my own opinion, which we can get into this. But Ansible I would equate to wanting to spin up architectures that are ephemeral, right? You're not wanting to maintain the state on an instance or virtual machine. You're just wanting to spin it up and it's eventually going to be thrown away. Right, and then you can use these Puppet and Ansible and Chef to deploy, AWS and cloud configuration management. But if you look at Terraform, it's designed specifically to work across multi-cloud providers and deploy out cloud configurations. So instead of just having to do a CloudFormation template and the equivalent on Azure and Google, you can do it in Terraform. So all that being said is that there's different use cases for the job, and it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And of course, you have to think ahead. Where will this go? Where is the company going to go with this product in order to make those decisions?
Right, and you did nail some pretty important points too. I've always heard that Chef is really good for things like cloud, and Puppet is great for more traditional architecture, infrastructure being, or traditional infrastructure being bare metal servers in a rack or virtualization. So yeah, it's all about the use case.
It is, and to do just a shameless plug here, we have all 3 of them at Linux Academy, all 3 of them and all 3 certification courses. So, that's great. I'm going to move on to the next question, and it's from Sharaf. And which configuration management tool is used most in the industry? Chef, Puppet, or Ansible? So I'm not sure that we have the research on our heads right now to be able to go answer that without maybe sparking a war.
That's dangerous.
We weren't prepared for that question.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tell, and in some cases it might also tie, or it might parallel the amount of organizations that are currently adopting Linux versus Windows, within their own infrastructure, within their own organizations. Because like I mentioned, some of the tools are more mature to support those different type of environments. So I'd be interested to see if there is a parallel there. So if there's more Windows organizations, is there then therefore one tool that ends up getting most of the market share because of that?
At the end of the day, it's going to seriously vary from company to company, from team to team, to application to application. In this day and age, architects, DevOps engineers, even developers are just expected to not necessarily know something in and out, but really have a wide breadth of knowledge to be able to go in and understand how it works. And once you understand concepts, you know how to continue learning. You know how something is applied. You know where to look in the documentation. So that's super important. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but we'll go in a little bit more deeper conversation, just a couple minutes, guys, because we are throwing in some good questions. But how does DevOps work with AWS and other cloud platforms? So for this, maybe we want to specify how does architectures as well as continuous pipelines for deploying code or testing and deploying changes to your cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think that different organizations are at different parts of their DevOps transformation, or their adoption of Agile, or even adoption of the cloud. And so if you consider the organizations that were primarily on-premise and they're currently trying to just implement their solutions that were on-premise into cloud infrastructure, like EC2 instead of bare metal servers or whatnot, then their DevOps practices might look a little different than an organization that has a cloud-first approach to their software development. And so what we're seeing is that organizations that are deploying solutions that are cloud-first and they're adopting even more of the technologies that are available from the cloud, they're getting a lot of things and a lot of benefits out of the box that would normally intersect with DevOps tooling. And so, for example, if you're using AWS, you instantly get measurement, with CloudWatch, CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch metrics, those kind of things. And so those are things that on-premise organizations would have to be responsible for architecting, whereas it's out of the box in this cloud environment. So some of the tooling may change as you get more mature or using more cloud-first approaches, but otherwise, as you're transitioning earlier on in the process, maybe some of the tools still remain the same.
So would you provide an opinion? Do you feel that serverless might be a component or next iteration of DevOps?
I think that we're seeing that a lot of the things that people think of when they think of goes away because of newer technologies like serverless. And so what you're actually going to see is that DevOps transforms to being more focused about governance, access to resources and whatnot. And so DevOps doesn't necessarily go away, but it shifts its focus.
It's great. Brandon, Travis, do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty thorough response from Johnny. The flexibility of AWS, it caters really well to DevOps, and a lot of, like you said, the traditional IT environment, you gain some of those kind of DevOps gains just inherently by moving to the AWS infrastructure. I would say, a lot of the tools we've talked about, they have great integrations. Like Anthony mentioned Terraform. It's easy to tie in. EC2 as a backend, a lot of AWS components as backends for Terraform. So it just ties in really well with AWS and DevOps.
Yeah, especially when it comes to infrastructure as code. When you get into things like Terraform or CloudFormation, you're specifying your stack or what your infrastructure looks like in code format, which is pretty awesome. That's the great thing I really like about AWS.
This is a great transition to what is one of my favorite questions. Which programming languages are best to learn for DevOps and why? How much programming knowledge is required?
Yeah, that's a very good one. It is very important, in my opinion. Knowing Bash is very helpful. Like I said, coming from a Windows background, I don't have a whole lot of Bash experience, but it is something I've had to pick up specifically when it comes to building pipelines and writing stuff with Jenkins. A lot of that's very Bash-based, but I would say Ruby or Python is pretty important. I like using Rake a lot, and that's Ruby-based.
Yeah, I would say whatever your config management tool is written in, it might be useful to know that language as well. So if it's Puppet or Chef, Ruby's really nice because you can add functionality with module functions, custom facts, types of providers, and even like collective agents and applications. All that's done in Ruby. And then Chef, you can do Ruby inline, so it makes sense to learn Ruby there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of people just prefer Python. So if you're using something like Ansible and you want to write modules in Python, it works very well. So. Sorry, Anthony. Yeah. You guys still there? Can you hear me, Travis?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so it's just us.
Yep.
So I wonder if people are hearing us or them.
Or both.
What we learned is that camera batteries don't last as long as you might think. And to make sure you have backups ready to go.
That's right.
Or get a new
Always
camera.
keep them charged.
We're going to need to get a new camera. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to sum up the question. I think I was answering. Which programming languages are best to learn for DevOps and why? How much programming knowledge is required? And I think what I was saying was that once you learn a language, really the only difference is syntax from language to language. There's concepts behind it, but once you learn one, it's easy to go ahead and change the other. And once you learn how to read a language, it's easy to learn how to read another language, right? So you might not be able to jump into a framework and know it inside and out, but when it comes to scripting and DevOps principles, when you're coding into AWS, Azure, Google Compute, using the command line interface, I would probably say two of the most popular are Bash and Python. And then, of course, configuration management tools like Puppet and Chef rely on Ruby, but they're super easy to learn. Don't be intimidated by learning to code. You don't have to be a hardcore object-oriented programmer. You just need to know the principles of basic scripting, really, at the end of the day.
Yep. I would say one more thing to add, though, is I'm seeing environments that have to support different operating systems. I'm seeing more of those kind of environments move to actually Go as a programming language.
I've seen that.
The reason why is you can run Go code just like Bash. There's a Go run command, and it's kind of equivalent to just running a Bash script, except it runs on all the operating systems exactly the same. Also, if you want to compile your application, though, you can create binaries for all the different operating systems and architectures. So that makes it also very portable. And so we're seeing a few more organizations that have to support those operating systems and architectures pick that one as a choice.
Great, great. I think everybody had a turn there. So let's jump on to how do you determine if something is worth automating?
I would say if you do it more than once.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's almost a dry principle. If you have to do it more than once, automate it.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that was easy.
Yeah.
Probably not more anything to that. So the follow-up question to that is when they're automated, how do you know if it's
CAM's summation, the measurement. If you are, letting your automation go, but you're, flying blind, then you could actually be doing a lot of damage by just leaving your automation going. You need to have the visibility and make sure that you know the impact of the automation within your product or your organization.
Fantastic. We have another one that's a little bit off of DevOps principles here, but can you explain the differences between block and file storage? One of you guys want to take the hit on that one?
I'll take it.
1, 2, 3, not it?
Brandon, go for it. Okay, here's my rough stab at it. When it comes to comparing S3 versus EBS volumes, one is object storage, and again, you're storing files or whatever in there as an object, where block storage is just that. It's just a large chunk of stuff that you have your operating system running on. That's my general kind of summarization. That's probably really bad.
Yeah, like Travis is saying, object storage it's great for like videos and images. Like Instagram, they're using object storage for all of the images. It facilitates distribution of objects, data redundancy, resiliency. It scales easily. Geo distribution is a little easier because a lot of them use like a REST interface, like OpenStack Swift, for instance. You do have problems with object storage with eventual consistency. When you read, you may not necessarily get the most recent version of a file. And like Travis is saying, block is great for traditional use cases, databases, operating system, stuff like that.
And from YouTube, and we have one that says, do you think there will be opportunities for DevOps for entry level?
I mean, I think so.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, like going into an organization, there's probably still a lot of low-hanging fruit, And so even someone who is able to contribute by adding new code as infrastructure to the repository, then they're starting to implement, some of these DevOps principles. So I think regardless of where you are in your career, I think that there's a way for you to contribute.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great niche too. Like you see a lot of guys coming out of school, out of CS programs, and they're learning Java, they're learning object-oriented programming. They don't know these DevOps principles. So you can get a huge leg up on a traditional entry-level position candidate by knowing these principles and this stack of technology. I think it's great. I think there's tons of opportunities for entry level.
I agree. And the thing is, it's not like we were born with this knowledge. We learned it over a period of time. You know, didn't just, a lot of it, I'm majority self-taught. So, and the great thing about now as compared to 10 years ago is that you have things like all these different cloud providers out there that are pretty affordable, and you can go and spin up like a Puppet environment, a Jenkins environment, and start learning how to deploy stuff using Jenkins to build pipelines to release things. So if you start picking these things up one piece at a time, it's going to help. And again, you could very easily get a job doing some low-level sysadmin stuff and slowly start building up your knowledge to transition over into a more of a DevOps role. Like I said, I start off as a developer, and I transitioned myself into DevOps, and it's done wonders for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Got a little bit of a lag.
Yeah, so I feel like you can go in as an entry level employee and you're going into an environment that's just beginning to implement DevOps practices. You can actually become an SME on a subject fairly quickly just by learning this stuff. Yeah,
And subject matter expert, just in case.
Yeah, subject matter expert. Yeah.
So I think that especially for Linux Academy students, when you go look at these courses are super in-depth courses that engineers at a professional level, senior level, are taking and applying in their environments, right? And so a lot of times the origin of this just kind of seems overwhelming. So you don't necessarily need all of that knowledge at the entry level. Take some of the Jenkins, the Ansible, the Puppet, the Chef, Quick Start courses that gives you that information. Figure out the DevOps principles, much like we've talked about here, and that helps qualify you at that entry level. Get you in there working on it. If you think of an entry level position, you're not in there necessarily building the architectures from scratch, but you're contributing, you're helping manage, while you might have the senior level engineers that are building those architectures, and it's an opportunity for you to learn. So don't be overwhelmed by it and never hesitate to ask. And that's a really great question, and I appreciate you asking. So the next question is there any plans on launching a Python Bodo 3 course? And I'll go ahead and answer that. We had just got done launching a new Python course that incorporates some Bodo. There is a little bit of Python 3 in it. So we don't have a plan specifically for Python 3 and using Bodo. Now, Bodo is, if I'm even pronouncing it correctly, it's probably one of those things
I think it's
where
like Bodo.
Bodo.
Yeah. Bodo. I don't know. I've heard it both ways.
Yeah.
It's seriously like tomato.
Right.
That's literally the difference there. Bodo. Once you kind of learn even at a 2 level, again, once you learn something, it's easy to go look at documentation and release information, release logs, and understand differences just like that. Once you understand concepts and learn it, it's a lot easier. So if you start there and then go do it, you can easily learn how to do it. So it's one thing looking at Linux Academy courses that teach you things or courses somewhere else, but learning how to go and look at that information, learning to read manuals, documentations. Once you have that, it's easier to go from one step to the other step. Once you're a certified CSA, Certified Solutions Architect, it's easy. You understand how AWS works. Once you understand how it works, you can go read, understand the concepts while you're doing things, and it helps you learn that much faster. So I'm making sure that we're answering the live questions from our pre-built ones in here. We have about 10 more minutes. And it feels like this is a planted question. I'm not going to lie. So it's from Tom on YouTube. It's not from anybody on Linux Academy staff, so thanks, I guess is a way of putting this. But you're doing really a great job, and I'm really satisfied with the work you're doing. How did you get the idea of launching Linux Academy in the first place? Seriously, it could not be more of a planted question. But thank you for that. And I'll just spend 2 minutes answering that question. Really, I was building streaming architectures on AWS back in 2010, and I was managing a bunch of Linux architectures and migrating to the cloud, and really I wanted to get certified. And as weird as it is I don't like books. I just don't. I don't like technology books. I'll read technological documentation and Linux manuals for hours and hours and hours, but books are just not for me. And what you realize is that training and learning is not a one-size-fits-all. What is for me is I like watching what you're actually doing while somebody's telling the concepts. I like following along hands-on as that's occurring. I also like practicing with exercises. And I also, to pass exams, I need to memorize once I understand concepts, right? And so it's repetition. And so the idea for Linux Academy came about because I wanted to build a way for me to easily learn and hopefully help others, because I know there's other people that learn the same way I do. And at the end of the day, we love changing lives and helping others at the Linux Academy. And honestly, it was just more of it was a hobby. I had no intention of it turning into a gig like this. And you know, the really great thing is I get to work with passionate technology people every single day. And the better part about it is we get to celebrate the success of our students when they post passing in the community. And you hear stories of, one of them was Firaz, and he talks about how he had a food truck in New Jersey and started with no Linux knowledge, did the LPIC 1 at Linux Academy for 6 months, went and started working at the Major League Baseball Linux data center. And now, 2 years later, he's leading a team at a web hosting company. So, you know, it's those stories that really, really get me into it. And that's why we continue on with the mission. Not only why we're here, but every single person at Linux Academy continues on. So thanks for that opportunity for us to plug kind of our culture and our values. Again, I swear it's not planted that I know of. So no, that's great. And so I got a couple left here, and we're going to run out of time. So if anybody else has questions, please send them in now. But I was wondering, what is the path for learning in DevOps? Like, first is it Chef, or Puppet, or Jenkins, or Docker, then Ansible? Can you prioritize the above by the order of easy to understand? So perhaps we don't necessarily dive into that. I think maybe one thing we haven't touched on that we should as part of this question is, how does Docker play in the role of all of this?
Sure. Yeah, so Docker is a very interesting technology, and one of the benefits that came out of Docker is that you are able to package applications regardless of their runtime, so whether it's Ruby or Python or .NET Core or something else. It gave you a way to package all of the components necessary for your application to run and make it so that way you could orchestrate that on a variety of different hardware solutions. And so now the technology is maturing even more. You can cluster with Docker Swarm, or there's the equivalent of a Docker distribution. So instead of like a Linux distribution, Docker distribution, that's called Kubernetes. And there's more technology on top of that, like Red Hat's OpenShift. And so the tooling is becoming even more mature for people to pass around these containers regardless of if it's on Metal, in the cloud, in virtual machines, you know, a variety of different hardware hosts.
Great. So from a standpoint of a beginner, somebody who's just learned Linux and wants to dive into you know, more advanced principles as it relates to DevOps, where would you guys encourage them to start? Travis, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a natural evolution. You had bare metal, virtualization, cloud, and now you have containerization like Docker. So I think at some point in time, Docker and containerization is going to be the next cloud. It's just going to blow up.
Two other questions that come in here, and I'm just reading them. So I swear they're not planted. Will there be any Linux Academy classes being developed on installing Red Hat, CentOS, or CentOS 7 Kickstart installations via command line and or GUI? I want to say that we have that already, because Kickstart, or a component of Kickstart, is part of the Red Hat Certified System Administrator, which is on Linux Academy. And I believe our CentOS also has installation, and even Red Hat has installation via GUI on the RHCSA course as well. So you're probably looking for more in-depth Kickstart. The answer to that is we could probably add that to the list. So we have a content release pipeline all the way through Q2, and we'll add this to the list to evaluate. I appreciate you asking. And then the next question is, any plans for an AWS Big Data specialty course? And the answer to that is yes. And the plans are, it's already in the works, and it is to be released here in either 7 days or 14 days. So it's almost done. We've been working on the labs for it, so there's going to be a lot of hands-on labs. We're also releasing today the AWS networking specialty course. Really cool component of that, opportunity for shameless plug. Really cool component of that is lots of labs, but it's going to be about a week or two late, but we're launching a game with it. And so that's going to be really cool for the things that we can't add in labs for hands-on. We still like hands-on, so we built a game. And then the AWS CSA, Certified Solutions Architect Refresh, which is a huge focus around what our instructor Thomas likes to call Project Omega, which is interactive diagrams as well as more advanced and hands-on labs as it relates to CSA. So all three of those are coming out starting today through the next 14 days. So, you know, that's really it for the questions we have. We're going to run out of time. Want to make sure that our backup battery has an opportunity to work. And so I just wanted to say, hey, thanks Travis and Brandon and Johnny for coming on. Thanks everybody who participated in the live stream. This obviously will be available on linuxacademy.com and our social media stuff and serverless and all those great places. And so we hope that you join us again and start asking questions. We hope to do this on a regular basis with different instructors throughout the Linux Academy and even developers and really how we just do stuff at Linux Academy. So again, thanks for the understanding of our technological issues. Thanks for bearing with us on our first really podcast as a way of putting it, and our first podcast at least inside of this building. So again, thanks, and thanks for everybody for joining, and we look forward to seeing you and celebrating your successes as it relates to learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.